What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Ancient Wisdom, your weekly Pokemon TCG podcast. My name is Corey Roush. With me, as always, is DJ Keener. DJ, how are you?
What's up, guys? Living the dream. Corey, how you doing, man?
About the same, you know. It's a wonderful Wednesday. Uh, so
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, what can you do? We're almost through the week, so I guess that's really all I can ask for, right?
Yeah, can't do much better than that, right?
Yeah. So this week we're going to kind of talk about some of the realizations or new meta trends that came out of San Diego, the smallest North American regional in a while. Actually, it ended up only being 846 players, so it's the smallest one since Salt Lake City. And we wanted to we only have the top eight listed. Like some people have shared lists online, and in terms of like where we usually get like results from Limitless, they only have the top eight so far. Not all of those lists are up, but we still kind of wanted to take some stuff away from that first. But as is tradition, before we get into that, how was your week so far?
It's
Or
been
what have you
good.
been into?
Yeah, it's been good. I played Mew without cross switchers at locals yesterday. Won a nice 0-1 drop. I don't know. Deck was fine. I played badly thinking I had cross switcher in my deck, so that just takes some relearning. I have a hard time, focusing on little stuff like that at locals. So whatever. And I've been playing a lot of Kyogre Lost Box online. I've actually been playing some games for once, and I mean that deck's sweet, so I've been enjoying that. And that's really it, though. I haven't tried anything like unique or cool out. Been kind of thinking about Crown Zenith decks earlier this morning, but we'll save that for another time. What about you, man?
I'm surprised to hear you say you've been playing, let alone, like you said, let alone online, but playing the Kyogre box, because I feel like that's been one of the versions you have not liked as much. So that's interesting to hear. Um, about the same. A lot of Lost Box. That seems to be my favorite deck of choice to go back and mess around with whenever I'm just playing games online. I played Rayquaza box at locals yesterday and dumpstered some idiot round one to the point that he dropped out of the tournament. In case you couldn't tell,
Yeah, that's what
me and Dave were
happened.
talking.
That's what happened.
That's obviously what happened. No. So, uh, yeah, I wanted to play the deck last week. Wasn't able to because I stupidly left it at home. So I played it this week, and I don't know. I really like it, but I think it's mostly just you could put mostly any version of Lost Box in front of me, and I'm going to like playing it. So I think I'm going to play the. We're going to get into the change that the One American team made to the Kyogre box this weekend, but I'm probably going to be trying something like that next weekend as long as everything comes in the mail in time. Online, it's basically this Lost Box version, that Lost Box version, switching between those, playing a little bit of Vika Dactyl because I'm still intrigued by that. Obviously, it won the event this weekend, but it was before that because like I liked it whenever we saw it 2 weeks ago from Crackler. So I didn't think it would win the tournament, but yeah, just
Yeah.
the same kind of stuff where like we're in this weird lull where we know Zenith is coming out next week, but it doesn't terribly change anything. But we're still seeing like even if it's like 1 to 2 card innovations from week to week, it's still enough to kind of keep me mildly interested. And it could be worse because if there was no decks that I enjoyed playing, like
hmm
if you remove like Lost Box and Mew from this, and you're just like, here's this format, play this for 6 months, that would probably really not be any fun at all.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. It's been nice to see some things pop up still, and it doesn't feel like the format is stuck in one place. It's cool. We kind of felt like there was only a couple decks you could really play or consider just a couple weeks ago. And I was kind of looking at matchups and trying to decide like what tech cards I wanted to put into Lugia now. And it felt like there were like 12 decks if you break down the Lost Box variants that you have to actually consider, which is pretty.
It is cool because like I remember like a lot of times last format, and we're not necessarily proponents of it has to be a wide format for us to like it. Actually, it's oftentimes the opposite, where we're just as happy with it being a more narrow format. And I think that far too often we're getting bogged, like not us, but people who are complaining about this format are getting
Mhm.
bogged down and acting like it is because Lugia takes up 30% of the meta share that it is a one deck format. It just isn't. Like
Right,
it,
right.
I understand that there is a best deck, and I don't think that that's necessarily a problem, and I don't think it's as oppressive as people are acting because I mean, it doesn't win the majority of events. That has. I know it's not just about results, but like acting like that's the only
Well,
way
and
is
more specific,
dying.
yeah, it's not. I mean, results matter broadly. First places don't matter that much. Like for a player, first place matters more, obviously. Like, you would take
Yeah,
one ring over three top eights probably.
yeah.
Um, but for like what deck is good, what matters in the metagame. Like winning the tournament doesn't matter so much as like, day two conversion, overall win
Hmm.
rate, blah blah blah. And those things like especially when you get down to single elimination, it's all variance. So like you can't say. So I'm gonna say this, and I'm gonna lead with the caveat that Vikavolt is definitely actually just like was underrated going into the format because nobody had the right build, and then continued to be underrated because nobody wants to play Vikavolt, I assume. But like just because Vika's won two regionals and got second in another, like Vika's not the best deck because of those results.
Yeah,
Again,
no, obviously.
Vika is clearly underrated based on those results, but I don't think anyone is out here ready to say like, "Ooh, man, we are definitely like Vikavolt is definitely the best deck, and we should be playing it." Right?
It's Vika's world and we're all living in it. No, yeah, obviously not.
Yeah. So like that's like the big thing to remember. Like Lugia is clearly still the best deck, but I mean the format has also done what good metagames do, and it's built itself around Lugia, and now we have a lot of A counters and a lot of decks that, like, if they're not a counter deck, have either built themselves to beat Lugia or built themselves to exist because there's so many counters to prey on.
Yeah,
And again, that's what good metagames do. I don't think this is a bad metagame. I think Lugia is not an inspiring deck to play or to play against. So, there's something to say there, but I don't think that makes for an especially bad metagame. I know people in general don't like 30% of the field being one deck, obviously, but oh well.
I also think that, and this is something more of a larger topic than what we're talking about today, but it's something that I've been thinking about is that I feel like every time, like usually when rotation is on the horizon, people are starting to get antsy, right? And this has been a much more pushed back rotation than ever before, at least in the modern era. So you have that riding on it in a format where people are not exactly thrilled that there is a 30% thing. Like if we
Mhm.
had rotated in August like normal, I don't think the people would be reacting, obviously, because I don't think Lugia would be what it is without all of those
Yeah, yeah,
special energies. But you know what I mean? Like I think that we're in this weird crossroads of it's an elongated format because
yeah,
the release is it's a certain deck holds 30% of the meta. We have a set on the horizon next week that realistically brings like six new cards to the format. It's just I think
yeah.
we're in a
Like
weird
if that.
confluence of events. Yeah, it's just a weird time where I think people are more prone to be negative than positive. But um yeah. Anyway, so in terms of what jumped out at you this weekend, what was the first thing? What was like some of the things you wanted to get into in terms of like lists or trends or what?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing, I guess, from San Diego, and we'd started to see this in the results at least from the prior regional. I'm drawing a blank on where it was. Arlington
Arlington.
was the Rayquaza Lost Box deck has kind of cemented itself as the winningest version of the deck. Um, we did still see the Azul, Grant, etc., team play Kyogre Box and do very well with it. But I basically don't think anyone else is playing that deck. I think there's probably like a couple other people, but by and large, like it's become Ray Box is the version that sees the most play, and I think that is an interesting adaptation to the field because that deck doesn't lose to anything that's like set out to beat Lugia. It doesn't care as much when Lugia plays like reactive answers when it's out here preparing with like Manaphy stuff and trying to play those creatively, that sort of thing. Um, it just attacks for a lot, and it does do some bench stuff. Like Manaphy still can matter, Dunsparce can still matter, but the deck is set up to kind of just win when it's allowed to execute its game plan. And I also think there's a lot of value there, which I think will be gone going forward, to people not either respecting that they have to play around Uri hands or not knowing how to. But that jumped out to me that we had two of those in top eight, and then I think there were some more in day two. I'm sure it was the most played version of Lost Box now. Heavily overtaking Sable's Art, which had stayed the most played version for however many events, despite Kyogre doing better. Um,
Well, and real quick to that point, like they shared the day one deck usage on stream,
mhm.
and Ray Lost Box in particular was the third highest played deck at 9.5%. The
Mhm.
rest of all other Lost Box variants was at 5.2%. So that's
Yeah,
encompassing all of the other ones. So
yeah,
yeah,
right, right. So I
it's kind of
mean,
taken
again,
over.
you combine the other two versions and plus whatever fringe fourth version exists, I'm sure, and you get Raybox is twice as popular as all the other versions combined. But that also, when you look at it that way, there's 14, 15-ish% of the field that is Comfey, Sableye, whatever decks.
Yep.
Which is continuing to rise as a whole. I think earlier in the format, Lost Box aggregate was about the same play rate as Mew, and now it's overtaken it. Mew stayed pretty steady with where its play rate is, though, so that's not surprising. I think just more Rogue and Fringe players have moved over to playing Box.
Yeah. So just for anyone who had not seen the numbers at the day one field was 33% Lugia, 11.1% Mew, 9.5% the Lost Box Rayquaza, 7.8% Regis, 5.2 other Lost Box, 4.1 Eternatus, and then 29% made up the rest of the field. So that also will encompass some of the top 8 decks that we see in a little bit here, which is actually kind of interesting. And I think that we're seeing that this format is something of a cycle, right? In the 1 week, Lugia is exceptionally dominant, and then they may take their foot off the gas in terms of playing counters, or the other decks are able to tweak a little bit, and they come back. And then this week, you see one Lugia deck in top 8 and a bunch of, I don't want to say weird, but there was some weird in top 8 at this
Yeah, I mean, there was some weird for sure. I think the thing that you have to recognize, both for this event and the metagame at large, top players largely chose not to play Lugia this weekend, and that didn't impact the play rate of Lugia basically at all. But what that means, I mean, number one is there's just going to be less highly skilled players playing Lugia. That obviously is going to lead to a lower win rate, especially in the day 2 field. But what that tells me, big picture, in this top 8 kind of reinforces that, is that the good players who had been playing Lugia said, I honestly don't know how to juke the tech this week. I don't know what answers I have to beat. I don't know how to beat all the answers. And the answer from their perspective could be, there's no way we can beat all the answers. It's too big of a gamble to play Lugia. I'm not sure I agree with that, but case in point, Aerodactyl is bigger than ever at this point, and that's the one tech card against Lugia that there's not a good answer to. Especially from Vikavolt, right? So we have 2 Aerodactyls in the top 8, 2 Aerodactyl decks, the winning Vikadactyl deck and the Arceus Control Toolbox, whatever you want to call it. And it's gotten to the point where, and we'll talk about this deck when we talk about some online results more, but we had Aerodactyl in Mew VMAX even, which is kind of insane when you think about it. That's not a deck that wants to give up bench space. That's a deck that already was playing cards to do effectively that and shut off Lugia's ability to Star Tempest.
It's not Star Tempest. Am I dumb?
So close. It was Silver Tempest is the set. I have no idea what it is. Star Portal? Nope, that's Falkia. Star Birth? Nope, that's Rayquaza or Arceus.
I'm just letting this happen at this point.
I'm letting this happen. I'm gonna figure this out. Star.
You tell me when you're ready for me to tell you. Is the real? Can I give you a slight hint?
Yeah.
Star is the
Summoning
second
Star.
word. There it is. We got there.
Yeah, it was gonna take a while. But that was already Mew's game plan, right? To not let them Summoning Star. So, and there's some other points we can talk about on Aerodactyl in there, but that's not. That would be the thing to me that tells me that the format's not in a healthy place, I guess. I know people have said this in other metagames when decks just started playing hammers because there was no clear way for you to either improve a mirror match or to beat a perceived best deck. So I guess I'm flipping for energy removal. It kind of feels like if this many decks are playing Aerodactyl, that tells me they're coin flipping for going first and hitting their Aerodactyl.
Yeah.
And for those of you who aren't familiar with the Aerodactyl, I guess we've talked about it a lot right now without really mentioning what it does. Aerodactyl's got an attack for a colorless. It's V-Star attack that makes it so the abilities on Pokemon V are all turned off. On your opponent's Pokemon V specifically.
Do you know what that attack is called?
Oh, not a clue. I wouldn't even try to guess that one. I've declared the Lugia one before. I've never declared an Aerodactyl.
Ancient Star.
Okay, there you go. So I would say that that's a little bit over-centralized, where we've got 30% of the field is Lugia, and then another sizable percentage of the field is playing Aerodactyl specifically to beat Lugia. But I think that was my biggest takeaway from the weekend. It's just there's a lot of Aerodactyls in the field now. What about you?
Well, so my like we haven't seen the list for the for I guess he goes by Gibby Gibson Archer Tangs Vikavolt deck, but we're like obviously Aerodactyl was in there. I think my favorite list that I saw this weekend was Makani Trans Arceus box. We talked about that like I guess it's about a month ago now. Whenever Katron
Hmm.
got top 16 at Toronto, and this is kind of the evolution of that, right? It puts you still have the 4-3 Arceus, you still have Espeon VMAX, Empoleon, but it incorporated other counters as well in the Flying Pikachu VMAX and Drapion and Celebrations Eviltal. This deck is, I mean, it's a pile, and it's everything that like I usually hate about RCS decks in that you look at it and the list is just hideous,
Oh,
but it's also kind of
disgusting.
like it's also what I appreciate about RCS decks, even though I never really want to play them. There's just so many options and so many like things you can do, and it's very disruptive.
Hmm.
I thought this deck was really cool. I can't imagine playing it for 18 rounds or however many he ended up having to play. Sorry, I'm not. I don't want to assume, but yeah. So, um, yeah, I thought that deck was fascinating. And I was happy. Like I called it out a couple weeks ago because I thought I was going to see success earlier. I'm happy to see it see success now because it's just a deck I've liked since it popped off. Um, like you said, the Kyogre box, while it's not the winningest because Rayquaza had two in top eight, they were ninth and six and somewhere else in the top 16. So
Hmm.
um, I do think it's kind of interesting to see, and part of that's because they're two of the better, or like that group is some of the better players in the room. But I do think it's interesting to see that there's a couple different versions of Lost Box that are still seeing. I mean, top 16 success is still rather successful.
Yeah, no, for
So
sure. And I think it's interesting that they're not changing to the other version still. I like they test a lot, they play a lot, they talk and think about Pokemon a lot. Like the fact that they have for themselves identified the Kyogre version as being the version to play as opposed to switching to Rayquaza is interesting to me. I'd be curious to like get a little more reasoning from them on that. I don't think any of them have ever really touched on it. I'm gonna bet that their reasoning looks a lot like what ours would, and it's gonna be like, well, I can't play six different colored energies, um,
yeah,
which
I
is
mean, which
fair.
is every time like I drew hands yesterday with the deck while playing it, and I'm like I know that this is going to work out
Yeah,
because
yeah,
I have
exactly.
enough switch cards or Colress or Comfy, but like these hands are hideous because I have like well also two lightnings, a fighting, and a grass energy in hand. What am I doing with this? But
Right, right.
yeah, it's a weird deck for sure.
And
Beyond
then
that, yeah,
the
no, I was just gonna say it is cool that the innovations are happening.
yeah, I was gonna say there's a couple other like smaller techs that like I mean, I think it was pretty overstated for them to act like this was a big deal, but like the one American group decided to play Cape of Toughness and Reggie's. My understanding is that's mirror match tech, but you know they thought that was pretty cool. And then one of the players from the Azul Grant etc. group played Reggie's and played a vacuum because they already had the tech and were next leveling it, which I just love to see.
Yeah,
You know, playing an answer to the Cape, even though there were probably 10 people in the room total playing Cape and Reggie's, you were already a step ahead, and, you know, whatever. Vacuum's a reasonable card, no matter how you spin it, so whatever. Um, Trying to think if there was anything else that I saw that was really cool. I don't think I have anything really. Um,
I guess my main question, and this is like we've seen it online and we joked about it last week, and then it was like top 32, but I don't think Israel Sosa is a name enough player that even though he's from like years ago, he hasn't played as much recently. But is the goo back?
yeah, I kind of wanted to talk about the goo when we look at online results again as well. So
Okay,
we can kind of move into that now, I guess. I don't
sure.
have much left to say about San Diego since we don't have the first or second place list or the
It
Lugia
doesn't
list from
help.
top eight.
Yeah,
Um, but like online, Gudra has continued to pop up, both Arc Goo and Lost Zone Gudra. And right now, I think I would still lean towards the Lost Zone version. I think if you're playing Arc, it has to either be the Toolbox control deck or Smelly Duraludon.
right.
Um,
Because like I mean, if you're gonna play an arc wall, why would it not just
yeah,
be the
right,
smelly?
right. You should just play Dura if you're gonna play that. But like, well, sure, if you're gonna play Comfy, why wouldn't you play Lost Box?
I mean, yes,
um, and the flip side is that the Gudra deck is pretty heinous against Lugia. That's been most people's contention. It's a bad matchup. And they're they do a lot to try to help that. Like there's a bunch of temples in there, parasols for the Yveltal. Um, but it's good against nonsense. I mean, Gudra's attack is good against, crap. And there's no mill tanks in the format, which has always been Gudra's problem. It can't really attack through those ever, and the answers in the deck aren't great. Mill tank's not present, nothing's walling it really. It trades fairly effectively with every card or every deck outside of Lugia, which is cool.
Very good against Regis, which seeing
right, a ton of Regis back in,
uptick,
a lot of good players playing Regis. I haven't thought about it too much. I'm not sure that it does really what you want to be doing against Lost Box though, against the Rayquaza box, I should say. So what do you get to 350 effectively? Yeah, that's a lot of energies, I guess. That's asking for 5 different colors.
Yeah, it's requiring you to like sprinkle damage early and them not like have the healing stadium.
Yeah, well the
potions.
The implication is that they're gonna parasol up, right? They're playing a bunch of parasols, so you hopefully can't sprinkle damage on it. Like you can't sable it, but like I get what you're saying as well. I mean that's like okay, not great. I guess
it's not. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's fine. I mean, so it doesn't seem like it's really solving like a Lost Box mirror at all, especially because like they have Raikou to kill 2 Comfies, so it seems kind of bad there. It seems bad against Lugia. So I guess my answer is that no, I don't think it's especially real, but it is good against all of the like crap decks that have just kind of come out of nowhere. It's because they can play a lot of answers for Lugia, and it's very good against Regis. So it's a solid tier 2 option.
What else from online results really piqued your interest?
Well, I mean, the other thing I kind of wanted to talk about, which I already touched on briefly, was Xander's Mew deck. So yeah, the other thing I wanted to talk about was Xander Perot's Mew list. We touched on it briefly before, but he kind of went wild. He put an Aerodactyl V-Star, a Manaphy, and some other interesting techs while cutting the cross switchers from Mew. I couldn't sell myself on putting the Aerodactyl in, but I think it's a really interesting idea, and kind of just wanted to talk about that and that list as a whole. So the main changes, like I said, were the inclusion of the Aerodactyl line in the Manaphy, and because of that, so this was a double turbo energy Mew list, so the 4 double turbos, kind of a thin supporter line, but using Judge, Roxanne for disruption. And typically would have played a bunch of Path to the Peaks. This version, because it has the Aerodactyl, just plays one path and has multiple Lost Cities, which is a concession to the Reggie matchup. The idea is that you have the Lost Cities, so you can be a little more positive against Regis. Manaphy has implications there, or applications there, excuse me. And you have Aerodactyl, so when you go first, you should, in theory, with all your draw power, essentially always beat Lugia. I guess let me get your thoughts on the list. I've kind of thought about this a lot. I read Xander's article that he wrote that if anyone's interested in this deck, you can go check that out as well. And I played a version without the Aerodactyl with no cross switchers last night just to kind of see how that felt.
I think it's very cool in theory. I think when it works, it's probably awesome. But I don't know that I like it against anything that isn't Lugia, because I feel like giving up, even if it giving up any sort of like gust options against Lost Box or anything like that seems less than ideal. Giving up like it's only one extra draw, but like actually having like anytime you start, like it's only if it doesn't feel as bad like whenever you're set up and you're drawing to 5. Like if you're trying to get out of the early game and one of your like 4 Pokemon is an Aerodactyl, that sucks. And like I actually like you didn't play the Aerodactyl, but another person in our locals did last night, and it happened to him a few times where it's just like, well, like I have it and like I could do something, but like I'm not drawing enough cards. I'm not getting out of the early game fast enough. So it definitely requires you to draw well more, whereas like Mew can kind of get out of its awkward hands a little bit easier without like whenever it's just more optimized. I definitely understand the theory, and like it does have a lot, like it's not just the Lugia application. While that is the most prevalent, we talked about it yesterday, it does effectively turn off Drapion, which is obviously relevant. It in the mirror, it makes it so that you're like one-side pathing them, which is really cool, but like I think it's just like it's for whatever reason.
So going first, so the big thing with the Aerodactyl, right, is it's only good when you go first because you have to attack with it and you have to evolve it.
Yeah.
So when you go second, your opponent playing Lugia, I'll just use as the example, has already, if they draw well, and like I like to make my assumptions. Second against Lugia, they're already set up by the time you can evolve and attack with it, right? If you go second in the Mew Mirror match, they've already evolved into Mew VMAX and started attacking, right? They may have just killed the Aerodactyl off your bench, even if they thought that was more worthwhile than attacking one of your Mew pieces. Um, Against Drapions, even if you go second, like you set up Aerodactyl, in theory they could just Drapion something if they're playing it. Even if you set up, and the other thing is like even if you set it up, like a lot of the decks playing Drapion are Mirage Gate decks, and they can still set up a Drapion and kill you through it anyway. Like it's still one shots Mew VMAX. You can't play like disrespectful towards it. Um, so I don't know. I guess it's very idealistic. This falls back to what I said earlier about the format becoming very die roll dependent or coin flip dependent as far as who goes first. Because these Aerodactyl decks aren't good at going second, right? When you play Aerodactyl, you're just by nature hemorrhaging points when you go second. And in something like DT Mew, when you cut Path to the Peaks and shuffle effects, you're getting worse going second against Lugia. So you're putting these Aerodactyls in theory, improve your Lugia matchup. But you're only improving it, and you're improving it a lot, but only improving it when you go first. And like, sometimes you hit, right? Like you do have to get lucky to win a tournament. So if somebody wants to tell me, if somebody wants to sell me that this is the highest overall win rate configuration, it's to say I'm really good going first against Lugia, really bad going second. Like let's just say I don't have a split in mind that's gonna like make this clear. So, but like let's say you're 75% to win going first with this version, and like only mildly unfavored going second versus slightly favored both ways the other way. 55% first and second just to make up a number. Like, yeah, you actually might have a higher win rate the other way where you're terrible going second. So, there's some truth to that, and there's some I mean, it's the same reason, I guess, that I'll say I don't like that you saw a lot of players shy away from Lugia. I want to be able to win all of my games. I don't really like playing matchup lottery and die roll lottery, so I would prefer to play a list that I feel is more capable of winning going first or second. So I think that's a lot about the Aerodactyl. Let's talk about the other things. How do you feel about the Manaphy? I think this is interesting because, in theory, the Kyogre Lost Box matchup is, depending on who you ask, somewhere between hideously unfavored, like near unwinnable, to slightly unfavored. Either way, it's unfavored, though. And Manaphy does do a lot there. And you actually are given, the same way Lugia is in that matchup, a lot of time where you don't have to put it on your bench and limit your draws the same way you would with the Aerodactyl. So I think the Manaphy is a little interesting. It's also a one slot option, like only one card slot. And yeah, I don't know. I also didn't opt to play it because the Kyogre deck is very unpopular, so I don't think it makes a lot of sense. I know Xander's mindset, I'm sure, was I'm also one of the better players in the room. I'm going to make day two. I'm going to be playing with the high-end players. It's going to benefit me to be prepared for them. But like in a random open field tournament, like it doesn't make sense to play Manaphy, right?
I don't think so. And I'm like, what if they did switch? They like that whole group did say the whole time that they wanted to switch off the deck and they just didn't. If they did, and like so if that is the reason you're only playing to the higher end players, that card's just blank because I can't bring myself to tech for something that I think is going to be 1% of the room. Like
Right.
that it doesn't make sense. Like and like you said, if you think it's unwinnable, then I guess maybe. But like
But like
I
even
think
if it's unwin and this spits in the face of what I just said about like wanting to be able to play in all my matchups. I guess my stance is that it's not unwinnable.
I agree. So like
So I guess yes. So first you have to convince yourself that the matchup is stone unwinnable or extremely extremely unfavored. Then we can talk about whether the Manaphy is worth playing or not. And then yeah, that's when you start looking at like the percentages, the number of times throughout a tournament that it's going to matter, it seems nearly irrelevant to me. There is some upside against Raikou from the Rayquaza deck, but
only some.
not
It's
enough,
not.
right?
I don't think so.
Like your game plan in that matchup involves a lot of psychic leaping anyway, and like to avoid letting them take three prizes, and that matchup is really really bad either way.
Yeah.
Especially if they play Drapion. I know like Pablo's list from top eight, he played double Raikou, no Drapion. I've seen a couple other people kind of switching to that. That might be a little bit less terrible for Mew, but it's still not good.
Yeah, and I know I was playing Drapion because I know that my local is heavily dependent on Mew.
Yeah,
I
well,
think
and
there was
it's
three
got a
in there.
lot of Mewtwo V Union as well.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah, the week before there was I mean I'm not always for like teching for locals or whatever, but I also don't feel the need to like go in with taking losses that you just don't need to take it. Like if you know your area, play to your area. The week before when there was 11 people, there was 3 Mew decks and 2 Mewtwo V Union decks.
Right.
Out of 10 people. Why like I mean it's just it didn't make sense to me not to play it.
Right.
But even if you don't, like you said, the Rayquaza does help. Or sorry, the Raikou does help, but really like if you attack twice with Rayquaza, you're probably winning the game.
Yeah, well, again, that's why like the game plan you need to kind of enact in that matchup is leaping Mew or identifying turns where they can't reasonably hit you with Rayquaza,
Yeah.
and taking advantage of those. But that also gets a lot harder. And this happened in our game last night when you can't both hand disrupt them and gust whatever you need to with Cross Switcher.
Yep.
And so that brings me to I'm actually still not completely sold on cutting Cross Switcher being wrong, because the one thing that I've like said about Mew in the past is you do lose the games where you brick turn one, and Cross Switcher is a card that has essentially zero utility on your first or second turn, or rather your first turn if you go first or second. Sits in your hand, and it's hard to justify discarding them, especially if you're not playing Silene. So it's a card. I mean, I've come to the decision that the correct move is just to discard them, especially your first two copies. You hopefully only need to cross switcher once in a match or in a game. But it's a card that doesn't help you set up. It's impossible to burn it on its own. But again, there's those pivotal moments where you need to both supporter them and get a switch and get a gust, and that's the only way to do it short of playing flip catcher. I mean, so let me put the question to you that way. Actually, is there any world where you, instead of playing like extra bosses and stuff, where you play flip catchers in here? Flip catcher's easier to burn, also.
Yeah, I'm not completely opposed to that, right? I think that you've sold me on the utility of that in Fusion, like the
Yeah,
Meloetta
Sparkle,
Mew.
Meloetta, whatever.
So and like it's the same concept. So yes, I don't hate it. I think I still prefer cross switcher, but I don't think I would go in without either. You know what I mean? I think
Agreed.
you need one of the two.
I think it's like there's an interesting question to like whether. So like one thing you do get from cross switcher is 4 slots, right? Because
Yeah.
realistically, what you do is play an extra switch and an extra boss. And some people are already playing 2 boss and Palpad anyway, so that's not really like you're only losing one of those slots, so you're gaining slots in your deck. Um, Once you start playing Flip Catcher, though, you're not really. I mean, I guess you can play just one boss still. Then you're not really gaining slots in your deck anymore, so that's sort of a lot less enticing to me. But I may still give that a shot just to see, because again, the amount of times where you do want to be able to hit your opponent with a Judge or a Marnie or Roxanne later in the game, gust the threat you needed to handle, and then ideally end on a path so that you can't get Drapion if you had to leave your Mew active. It happens a lot. I mean, and that to me was the reason. Like, that sounds like you're asking a lot, but when you draw through 20 cards in a turn, have multiple search cards, have Rotom phones, that happens, and I think you're giving up a lot of that value to get a little bit cute. Um, so I think I will test more no cross switcher. Um, I think I probably will try the flip catchers now that we've talked about that. I'm not convinced that's going to be any good. But I mean, we talked about like losing some consistency because you lose your bench spots to Aerodactyl or Manaphy or whatever. Like by doing this, essentially what he did with those slots was play more Rotom phones. So like you kind of get the consistency back on the tech, but I don't know.
Consistency-ish. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And I guess the other thing to address here, just since we're talking about the list, and this is the last, I don't want to call it unique thing, because other people have played multiple Lost Cities in DTMU even after multiple Path was put in. But they did go with 2 Lost City, which is, like I said, that's kind of your answer to Reggie's. Regis are by and large playing two Regigigas only now, so it is fairly simple, fairly accessible anyway to just Lost Zone both of their Gigas and completely turn that engine off. Um, that being said, I haven't really been impressed with the utility of Lost City anywhere else. Because Sablezard isn't the popular Lost Zone variant, like you're not turning off Clara for Charizard. Um, you're turning off Rod for some of the important like attackers, I guess, against Rayquaza and Kyogre. But like, there's multiple copies of all of the attackers in Rayquaza that you care about. So like, it's easier said than done to get rid of both of them. You might be able to brick them if they prized poorly, but that's not really a. I mean, again, this rolls backwards to if the matchup is like really, really bad, maybe you have to do something like that. Um, I'm not sure. I haven't played that one enough. It doesn't really come up for me when I play Mew online. Just haven't had a big sample size against it. Um, like maybe that's something that you have to rely on. But I mean, do you think Lost City in here is really applicable in many other places?
Probably not in many other places, no. So it's like, is it like I just said before that I don't think that taking something for that's like a 1% of the format, if you think it's unwinnable, I don't. Do you think is do you think Reggie's is unwinnable
No,
without
no,
Lost
no, and
City?
that's why I was asking about the other
That's what I
decks.
mean.
And
It's the
like I
same thought
don't,
exercise,
yeah,
right?
no, and I don't think you need it to beat Reggie's. I think Reggie's is mildly unfavored. It also gets better if you play more hand disruption effects. I think like you can easily play depending on what you do with your supporter line. We've talked about this a little bit. Like you can, I guess like if I had to pick between playing Lost Cities or just playing an Avery, like you can play Avery and Echoing Horn in Mew pretty reliably
Yeah.
in brick them that way. You're playing Pal Pad already, so multiple turns of Avery plus doing the thing where you set them up with two of the same Reggie. And then in subsequent turns, you can try to gust around that one, force them to have their scoop up nets, etc., etc. And the more hand disruption you play, the better. And the deck just loses to itself. Like even I don't think Reggie's has any like insane, oh yeah, you're like 80% favored here because you lose to yourself so often. It doesn't matter how good the deck is theoretically in a matchup because it just loses to itself sometimes. So like I don't want to go overboard teching for it. The Reggie tech that he played, I guess this is the last card to talk about, and this is the one that I actually think is like the best card inclusion on its own. Though I do think again the cross switcher exercise is interesting, and I'll be working on that more. Was to play Big Charm, um, which is like so simple, but it fixes the math on Regigigas plus Choice Belt. It doesn't one hit knockout Mew VMAX anymore. And it also makes it so a Lugia with four powerful colorless and a Choice Belt doesn't one shot Mew VMAX. And that's pretty good. I don't. That's another one that was kind of like when we realized we misjudge. I'm kind of surprised that we hadn't ever even tried that one. I do think like he's giving up some percentage by not playing Big Parasol, which I thought was really good in Mew.
Yeah.
Um, but like different matchups, different things, I guess. Like I do. That's another thing that I said to you yesterday. I think if you play Parasol, also the Kyogre matchup already gets a lot better. So there's some things to consider there. I do really like the Big Charm. And again, that already like if you're able to turn it so their Regigigas doesn't one shot your Mew VMAX, that already is adding a ton of percentage in the matchup.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, it's kind of a longer talk on that deck, but I thought that was really the most interesting deck I've seen from the tournament. I don't. It's funny because it's not like a ton of new cards or anything crazy, but
Yeah.
the idea of putting random non-fusion strike Pokemon in Mew is kind of novel. The only thing we've seen ever is a Drapion, for years when that was really popular. I don't think I've ever seen in the. I don't think I've ever seen other than like Pumpkaboo, I guess, but really just people playing random
Non-fusion
other
cards.
fusion or
Yeah.
cards in Mew. Like that is interesting on its own, and Cross Switcher has been a sacred cow in these decks for so long that I think that's worth talking about too. Though that started because the deck started off as a Pokestop deck, and the card has certainly gotten worse since that was removed.
Yeah. No, it's yeah, I agree. I think that it's gonna be really upsetting when we for anyone not aware, we record this 2 days before it comes out. I'm really excited for tomorrow. So, but right the day before this comes out, that's when we get all of the lists, and all of a sudden there's a million cool things to talk about
Yeah,
because oh wait, what happened here? But yeah, it's that. But that allowed us to dive a little bit deeper on. I think we both thought this was the most interesting deck of the
it's
week.
it's for sure the most interesting deck of the weekend. Like, people love to tell you how innovative their deck was when they played one tech card. I'm looking at you, Reggie Capes. Shut up. Um, but like this was legit. This was legit innovative,
Mhm.
and that doesn't necessarily mean it's good or correct or whatever. But
Yeah, but
um,
it's worth talking about for sure.
certainly wouldn't use the word optimal. Uh,
Somebody would.
looking at you, Xander. I don't know if I've gone on my rant about my pet peeve about that, but don't call your deck optimal. You're wrong, and that's a stupid thing to say.
I agree, but yeah. Um,
Yeah, but was there anything else online that you've seen? I don't know how much you've looked at the results. Really, there was only the one large tournament.
Yeah, I hadn't looked until like right before we were recording, and even then it was like it was won by Palkia, which I okay.
Yeah,
I'm not as
yeah.
and then the Fusion Mew came in second. You had
Two
Lost
Rayquaza boxes,
Box.
I
Yeah.
believe. Maybe just one in top eight. I don't know. Yeah, just one.
No,
Um,
I believe it is. I thought one of the other ones for whatever
oh
reason
yeah, it
got
didn't
hit.
show the picture, right? That's what it was.
Yeah.
Yep.
So because that one was a little bit different, it didn't just play Rayquaza. It didn't play the Raikou of the Amazing Raikou. Instead, it played Galarian Zapdos V and Raikou V and
Mm-hmm.
Luminion V, so
Has
that
an
it could
ice
take.
Q and wash energy for the mirrors.
Yeah, it's similar, but like
This has a
off
lot
like
less energy cards. I didn't notice that before either.
which makes me a little bit nervous for. I mean, you can hit Rayquaza easy enough. It's not like Kyogre where you have to have 8 on the last turn of the game, but
Yeah.
it's still a little. It makes me worried about having to loss end things early. But maybe I just need grow up.
Yeah, no, that's fair. That's kind of my approach normally, but I'd have to try that. I mean, I know that's only 9 basic energies. That's very few for that style of deck.
Yeah, yeah,
But it also needs less colors because it doesn't have Raikou, excuse me.
yeah. It has what
Well, it does
four?
have a Raikou, so well, it doesn't need the metal energies.
Yes. So it's what we have: water, grass, lightning, fighting.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of and there's no psychic, which I did not notice before.
I didn't notice
Which
that either. Yeah, no Sableye.
that I like. I don't think that that's completely out of left field. I think some people have messed with that, especially in decks like this. I just can't get there. Sableye's too broken for me to not want to play, but maybe I'm wrong.
I think my issue with that is that I feel like Sableye is the way you beat a lot of nonsense. And I think Sableye is like the card that flips weird matchups or gets you out of weird situations more than anything else. And I don't think I'd want to give that up.
Yeah, get into decks that like understand your game plan and are able to like effectively answer that, like doing like the psychic leap thing, like you
Mhm.
mentioned, and things like that. You know what's really good when they're psychic leaping, spreading 12
Yeah,
damage
killing
counters with Sableye.
Genesects.
Yeah, like so. I'm not ready to give that up, but
Yeah. I guess the other question I had from these online events, you mentioned it. Palkia won that tournament, and as you can see from the late night results, another, I think, only one Lugia in top eight.
yep,
And there were a lot sprinkled throughout the middle of the standings, a lot that went like X2, X3, whatever. Um, with Lugia falling, I don't want to say further out of the meta, but further out of like the winners meta with so much hate running around. Do you think that Palkia, like, and we already had talked about it being kind of out of the format from our perspective prior to San Diego. I This deck should just not be played anymore, right? Like, unless, do you think that just being Palk Intel is so good against Rogue that it's worth playing still?
possibly. I mean, I think that. So do I think it's a tier one deck? Absolutely not. Do I think it could be on the same level as like something like a Goodra or something? Sure.
So
So I guess like
yeah, that's so the interesting thing to me is like the way Lost Box has evolved has been as an answer to playing against more Lugia. Lost Box was already unfavored against Palkia last format, and they've built less for that matchup now. So like there's a percentage of the field you're good against. If you're playing either multiple Drapion or Drapions and just recursion for it, which I think this build, yeah, just the one Drapion, but still has. I guess they only have a Thornton to recur it, but point stands.
but like also but like
Drapion
also
ways to
if
recur it. Like you can be. I guess my point is the deck is probably favored against, or at least decent against those decks, right? I'm not sure. I'm kind of talking myself through this. My original take here was that this deck is unplayable.
yeah, I mean So I guess we're back to where we were a couple weeks ago, and it seems that like if you're looking, a lot of people got to the place with Lugia like you did, where you're going to optimize, and that unless you're going to keep the Bird Keeper in or you're going to keep the Paralyze in, sometimes the Articuno can carry you, and like it like you're kind of relying on enough of the paralyzed decks to have dropped off in play, right?
Yeah,
Because they did.
right.
But if you're like in that 1% of the room that's playing the Articuno Jelly Palkia deck and people are just like, well, I'll take my loss if I face it. It can be your day. I wouldn't want to be the one to do that, but I can understand the logic tree that gets you there, if that makes
Yeah, I
sense.
guess that my question for myself even, and I it's funny, I got rid of my Palkia Vs and V Stars. I guess I'm gonna have to pick up some Vs again because I got rid of the V Stars planning to get Crown Zenith ones and didn't
Yeah,
think about the Vs.
absolutely.
Um, is again against the rest of the meta other than Lugia, just a brief set ago, we were pretty strong believers that Palkia was the best deck and favored against most things.
Yeah,
And
last format I
so
thought was the best deck in the room. So
so if Lugia is dropping off, you know, is there more space for this deck to sneak in? Because it does seem like just Palk Intel is good against all the not Lugia.
yeah, you know what, Dave? I'm gonna take that. I'm gonna try that this week. I'll upload this list and I'll try because like I've played plenty of Palkia Intel before. I'm gonna give this a whirl
Yeah.
online and see.
Let's circle back on this one. I'm actually kind of curious now that we're talking about it. I had come in here planning to say I don't know why anyone would play this, but going back through this, is Lugia falls off. I mean, I guess the issue is Lugia's play rate's not going to fall off. The question is if it is going to be less in the higher portion of the metagame because of how much hate is going to be around.
Yeah,
So can you make it to 3-0 or whatever you have to? And I mean, the Articuno plan obviously does beat Lugia sometimes, whether they don't have the answer or they don't find it or whatever. So I don't know. It's interesting.
yeah, definitely. It was because I like you. Like when I first started, I was like, well, this like I mean, you heard my reaction when we started talking about this tournament. I was like,
Mm.
well, that doesn't matter. But like the more we talked it out, I was like, well, wait, maybe. Like I can see the logic, and if you're playing against a bunch of other things, then it's probably fine. So um, yeah, I'll report back. Not that I'm the only voice, but like I like to if there's something we're talking about, I'd rather like actually try to figure it out myself
Yep.
rather than waiting
Yep.
for somebody else to do it for me. So yeah, we'll this will be something we'll discuss next week
Yeah,
when we
we'll
come
circle
back.
back on this one. I think it's interesting. So we'll see how that works out and what you think about it. So I guess that's it for the online stuff too. Really, that's the only event over 100 people. There were some other ones, but there weren't like they were close. But I didn't see anything interesting in the list. I don't know. Did you look at anything else?
Only a little bit. Nothing really jumped out at me enough. Like like I said, I think that's what you said. I think especially in tournaments like that, like we said it last week that I don't think these decks that like when we were talking last week previewing the event where we thought that yes, Vikadacta would not seen play online, but like what's up with that? Like what is it just not good or what's going on? And it could be because they're open deck lists. Um, I do think that there's like people are just like that's why Lost Box is always so popular because a lot of people like playing it and it's a lot of fun. So you're gonna see a lot more play rate online more than other decks. Like
Hmm.
even like I think it's getting a disproportionate play rate online, and I think some other decks do that as well. So
Yeah.
I think it'll be interesting to see where we go from here
I
this
wanted to
week,
sell
especially
my
as more deck lists come out, and
diamond ring.
But
even more than that, I think within the
my
next couple
level,
weeks we're gonna get like even if I think online it's gonna affect more than in person, right? Because you're more likely to try something nonsense from Crown Zenith online than you are um, in person because you're not
Hmm.
paying hundreds of dollars to travel. But I'm excited to see all of the Radiant Eternatus decks that come out starting next week, or things with the new Seal Stone. So that's actually what we're going to talk about next week. Is we're going to preview the six or so cards that are in Crown Zenith, and while Liverpool will not be, I believe the next regional is Liverpool, correct? And
Yeah, that's right.
yeah. So I will be previewing that as well, even though it'll still be in this format. I would. It's the second only European event of the format, and the other one was won by Palkia Vikavolt. So I don't think that will be repeating, but I think that'll be interesting to talk about as well. So anything else before we sign off for the week?
No, nothing much else to add here. I guess the only thing I'm gonna ask you a quick closing question here. Are we playing canceling Cologne and Lugia now? Are we accepting that that's the Aerodactyl answer?
Uh, I think it's worth trying. I don't love it, but like
I guess I'll mess
Aerodactyl.
with that one and I'll report back with that next week.
Well, because as you said, Aerodactyl is not going away. It's actually just
Mhm.
seeing increased
Mhm.
play.
Yeah,
So I think
more
it's
and more.
worth trying.
Fair, fair. No, I think that about does it though.
Dope. Well, we will catch you guys next week. Like I said, next week will be Crown Zenith and online results. So definitely check back in for that. And we will see you next week on Ancient Wisdom.
Thanks, guys.